This is The Weekly on clickorlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Good morning, I'm Justin Warmoth. In 2006, a Leesburg mom told police her 2-year-old son had been kidnapped from his room. 17 years later, Trenton Duckett is still missing. News 6 investigator Mike DeForest has been following the story from the very beginning and just revisited the case in a 4-part series streaming right now on YouTube. Mike is here this morning to talk about what he uncovered, but first, some background on the nearly 2-decade-long search for Trenton.
Hello. Hi. What is Trenton wearing, honey? I don't know. He was ready for bed.
A young mother reports an unimaginable crime, the kidnapping of her son, 2-year-old Trenton Duckett. Someone cut through this window screen and opened a bedroom window where the toddler had been sleeping. Now he was gone.
You don't know what you dressed him in before you went to bed? He might have had his shoes off.
That chilling phone call was made from this very apartment back in 2006. Nearly 2 decades later, people in this community are still asking, where's Trenton? He's never been found. This is what Trenton Duckett looked like when he vanished. And this is what Trenton Duckett might look like today as a young adult. Some people, including his family, are still holding out hope that he could be alive.
And there's not a day that goes by that we don't think about him.
I recently caught up with Trenton's father, Josh Duckett.
You think people are still holding back information?
I definitely think there's people out there that have information that's not saying, you know, and no matter what the outcome, we want answers.
17 days into the search for Trenton Duckett, and fatigue is starting to set in.
I've been covering Trenton Duckett's disappearance since the very beginning. Digging through some of my old case files and reviewing hours of video footage stored on beta tapes, we're taking a new look at the missing child investigation.
I can't even start to begin to imagine what kind of person would do something like that to begin with.
Melinda Duckett, Trenton's mother and Josh's estranged wife, told authorities their son had been abducted from her apartment. But very quickly, police suspected Melinda knew more than she was saying.
I'm sure you know, I mean, a lot of people are questioning whether you had something to do with this.
Oh, I understand that. I do.
Melinda denied hurting Trenton.
Could you harm your own child?
No.
Where were you? Why aren't you telling us where you were that day? You were the last person to be seen with him.
The day after she was questioned by CNN talk show host Nancy Grace, Melinda Duckett committed suicide.
She was the only suspect, and a lot of answers went with her.
In the nearly 2 decades since then, no evidence has emerged indicating Trenton is still alive, but there is also no evidence he's dead.
There's nothing to indicate any sign of trauma has occurred, so nothing of that nature.
That gives Trenton's father hope that Melinda may have given their son away to another family.
Until they can show me something else, there's nothing else to go on other than he's out there somewhere, and we have to continue to push the effort to try and find him.
And Mike joins us now. Fascinating piece, fascinating series. Folks can go on that right now on YouTube and News 6 Plus and watch that. But I want to get your take on some of the things that I stuck out to me during this. And initially, when you started covering this, when this happened back in 2006 in August, what do you remember about the initial case before we start to unravel this? What was your initial take on what happened?
I remember, I mean, you hear the story, a child kidnapped out of their own bedroom, right. And that just doesn't happen, or doesn't happen often. And right. So, I mean, it was very terrifying. And so you know this was going to be a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it was a big deal. I mean, not only local news organizations, mm-hmm. but over time, a big contingency of national news organizations started covering this child's mm-hmm. disappearance. But it was within a couple days you could tell something was off about this story about the potential kidnapping. And that gets into the mother, Melinda Duckett, who, mm-hmm. Whereas the father, Josh Duckett, they were separated. Mm-hmm. He wasn't around when this alleged abduction happened. The child was abducted from the mother's home, and they were basically kind of holding separate press conferences. The dad would hold one, and he was very open and upfront, talking, help me find my child. The mother we didn't see as much. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the first clues that there was something a little off about this.
Yeah, and naturally, based on the 911 call as well, where she says, I know he did it, under her breath, doesn't reference who he is. But naturally, I think your instinct, and really the police admitted this, that they first looked at Josh.
And I understand, we didn't hear that 911 call till months and months after the fact.
From the police point of view.
And one of the key things on this, too, that we didn't realize right away was we had discovered the court filings where Melinda had gone to court to get a restraining order against Josh, claiming that he wrote all these threatening messages on MySpace. And looking back now, Josh, I think, he knew he didn't write it, and if I vaguely recall, he basically said, there's more to this story, I can't get into it. And sure enough, there was more to the story, that police did confirm she had written these messages to herself, in essence framing Josh.
Right.
And what was important is this was before the so-called abduction happened. This was to get custody of Trenton, and she did this in court, and that's why law enforcement could have arrested her for perjury, lying to the judge about this email.
They had an
exchange.
arrest warrant typed up.
They were ready to go, but they made the strategic decision.
Why? Strategic in what sense?
To read the reports now and to remember what law enforcement said then is they knew they could arrest her, but they all had the belief that, based on their conversations with her, that she was going to lead them to Trenton. Now, whether that was the mother leading them to his body or whether it was that she was just hiding him from her husband, I think they got the sense that there was this vindictive relationship between the husband and wife, and wondered if just this was a game she was playing. And so they said, and I was reading a report even just last night, that Leesburg police talked to FBI and FDLE and said that they all came to the conclusion they did not think she was suicidal. Right. And so that's why police say they made the decision to not arrest her, follow her around, see what she does.
Yeah.
But obviously that was...
So perhaps from their point of view, maybe that leads them to Trenton, where they can find him, or whatever they can find from that. Just let her kind of leave the breadcrumbs.
And in hindsight, that was not the right decision.
Right.
And Josh is very critical of law enforcement for not taking her into custody when they could have, because he believes the answers died with her.
And you had a chance too, and we showed it off the top here in that piece, but you really see it more in depth in your series, your interview with Melinda Duckett.
This was a couple days after the disappearance and a couple days before she committed suicide. Leesburg police held a press conference. And they're just trying to piece together the timeline leading up to Trenton's disappearance. And they held up photos, not only of Trenton, but of the mother and the father, and said, hey, public, please let us know where you have seen these people in the hours leading up to Trenton's disappearance. And interestingly, it really caught my attention that the father, Josh, was standing right behind police. And in fact, he came up to the microphone and said, hey, I've told police everything. He's claiming, hey, my story has checked out. Melinda, the mother, was not present. And that stuck out like a sore thumb. Why was she not there? And it just gave the implication that this press conference was more about where was the mom. So that's where we started to get insight that police were suspicious of the mother.
And Mike will share more insight on that interview with Melinda Duckett coming up, plus what the former lead detective on the case believes happened to Trenton. Stay with us.
This is The Weekly on ClickOrlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Welcome back. 2-year-old Trenton Duckett vanished from his Leesburg home nearly 2 decades ago. And even to this day, his disappearance remains unsolved. News 6 investigator Mike DeForest just finished a 4-part video series on the days and weeks that followed, digging through his old case files and archive video, including an interesting interview with Trenton's mom, Melinda Duckett.
Law enforcement has not called her a suspect at this point. She is a grieving mother who just lost a child, but I did find it suspicious that police really were kind of hanging her out to dry as to, hey, where was this mother? So in my questioning of her, I didn't jump to any conclusions. I mean, we tried to talk about Trenton. I tried to ask her the questions, where were you guys? She, in the hours leading up to the disappearance, she was very vague. She kept bringing it about herself, talking about how awkward it was to go into a grocery store and people were staring at her. And you never want to judge somebody who's lost a child or going through a tragedy. Everybody handles it different, but there were enough questions that I did ask her about, hey, some people think you may have something to do with this. And I tried to be respectful about it. And she says, I acknowledge that people are thinking that, but I had nothing to do with Trenton's disappearance.
From your interview until Melinda Duckett took her own life was probably a few days, a week?
I believe so. I think it was the day after I interviewed her, was that confrontational interview with CNN talk show host Nancy Grace. It was then another day after that that Melinda Duckett committed suicide. And Melinda's family later sued Nancy Grace and CNN, claiming, in essence, that confrontational interview on TV drove Melinda to suicide. After months, if not years of litigation, they ended up reaching a settlement, and the family and CNN acknowledged that Nancy Grace did nothing wrong. But CNN and Nancy Grace contributed several $100,000, which ultimately ended up with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's the organization that continues every few years to put together an age-progressed photo of Trenton, which just shows that even though some would say it's probably unlikely, there may be a chance he's out there, and this is what he might look like.
Do you know when the latest update from investigators, when was that last released on this case?
I mean, I just talked to law enforcement, and they continue to get tips on this.
Really?
Usually with media attention, they get some, but
yeah.
Are we any closer to finding Trenton at this point? I don't know.
Nothing of substance has been found since.
No, it's been very, very quiet, and that's the frustrating part for the family, because they just want answers. And you've heard in these interviews that the father, Josh Duckett, he basically says, until you tell me something different, I'm going to assume he's still alive. He's realistic. The father's realistic. He knows that after all this time, that's unlikely.
Right.
But somebody's got to keep the torch alive for this child, and certainly the family does that. And who knows, crazier things have happened.
And in one of your archive interviews with the lead detective, he believed, his theory was that Melinda did kill Trenton.
Right. The official Leesburg Police Department stance is that the case is still open.
Right.
They still keep, they rotate investigators, but they have an investigator assigned to it for any new leads that come in. But yeah, we interviewed the lead detective, Rich Giles, shortly after he retired. His personal opinion.
Right.
And he makes clear that it's his personal opinion that Trenton is dead, based on everything he saw. But they have investigated. One theory out there has been what we call the handoff theory.
Right.
That did the mom give the child away out of vindictiveness to her husband? And police have tracked down those leads, and it's fair to say there has been no confirmation that happened. But they have no confirmation that he's dead yet either.
Yeah, that is the part 4 on the series, the handoff theory, where you look into the statements made by the Wendy's worker about Trenton, or what was it was like Denton or Trenton, and she was going through and said, oh, I think we had someone here, and that sort of brought in the Marion County Sheriff's Office, which did Leesburg see that as getting in the way of what they were looking into?
That's very interesting you bring that up, because it was very unspoken. And I don't want to try to show what happened, but yes, Leesburg Police was the lead investigating agency on this. And then at the time, all of a sudden, out of the blue, Marion County chimes in on this very national story and says, hey, we are investigating this under the theory that he's alive. And of course, that draws the media attention to Marion County. And yes, they did have this witness, this Wendy's worker, who claimed to have seen Trenton and the mother in the drive-thru the morning that he vanished. And then the mother came back about 20 minutes later, and Trenton was gone. And there were some other some would say coincidences, that it just so happened that a friend of the mother's happened to have a job right across the street from this Wendy's. Now, the business was closed that day, but she had talked to him that day. So there were reasonable questions as to whether this Wendy's witness was credible. Leesburg Police will tell you that the timing, based on what they knew of Melinda's movements, based on her cell phone records, that she wasn't near that Wendy's at that time. And so they discounted that handoff theory, that particular one. However, for Josh Duckett, the father, to hold out hope that his son would still be alive would presumably mean that for that to happen, the mother did hand the child off. And so he still holds out hope that possibly that may have been what happened, even though what may not have been.
Something he knows, though, is that, or he feels in his heart, that someone knows something who was either Melinda's friend, what have you. he believes that there is someone out there with information, more information than we know today about what happened, right?
Obviously there was a lot of media coverage on this then, and Melinda's family will tell you that she was villainized. Particularly, you see the national coverage. Right. And Josh worries that perhaps silenced people who would have been willing to come forward, but due to either fear of getting in trouble themselves or just the negative national spotlight, maybe didn't say everything they know. That's his questions, but he believes that there are still answers out there, that people just haven't come forward of what Melinda may have told other people about what happened during this time period in 2006.
What's interesting as well is that, months later, we have another high-profile, disappearance of a child.
Talking about the Casey
Anthony.
Kaylee Anthony's disappearance.
Right.
And having just covered this, there were so many similarities of the mother who had the child who suddenly vanished and the reported kidnapping. And I'll tell you, I remember talking to Orange County investigators who were investigating Casey Anthony and the disappearance of her daughter, Kaylee. And they acknowledged that at least the Trenton Duckett case was in the back of their mind, and the fact that Trenton Duckett's mother committed suicide because she was allowed to stay free for a couple days after the disappearance. Law enforcement acknowledged that was in their mind when they made the decision to arrest Casey Anthony as quick as they could once they saw something that they could arrest her on, just believing that once you have the mother in custody, you might get answers. Well, they didn't get answers from Casey Anthony either.
I know that this case has been on your mind since this, and likely because there has been no resolution or fact about what indeed did happen. But what do you hope your renewed investigation and going through all of the details and revisiting this, what do you hope this accomplishes?
Well, one thing I was surprised is talking in our newsroom here, starting to become a little bit older guy with the gray hair coming through, is talking to some of our younger employees who, to me, it just feels like everybody knows this story. But you talk to our younger employees here and they maybe have heard the name Trenton Duckett, but they didn't know all the intricacies. And you think about how much Central Florida has grown and changed over just the last 15, 20 years. So part of our reason for doing this was knowing that there are people out there who don't know this story, don't know the intricacies. And if it renews the discussion, if it gets to that person who may have some information, can share it with law enforcement, maybe after all this time they feel more comfortable talking about it. And that's one question I asked Josh Duckett, the father, was, how do you feel when we do news stories about this? Is it digging up the past? Is it hurtful? And he says, no, anything helps. Any little bit of publicizing Trenton's disappearance and getting his name out there hopefully will help bring this case to resolution, however it resolves.
And you can watch Mike's complete 4-part series on the disappearance of Trenton Duckett right now on YouTube, News 6 Plus, and clickorlando.com. I'm Justin Warmoth. Have a great Sunday.